Good to see everyone here this morning as we now begin our Bible classes, our Bible studies. We have visitors with us. We're glad that you could be here and worship with us upon this first day of the week. We'll be in Daniel chapter 7 is what we will be discussing this morning. Let's begin our Bible classes, if you will, with a word of prayer. Please let us pray at this time. Holy Father in heaven, we come humbly before you in prayer this morning, thanking you for all that you have done for us, that you are a beneficial and loving Father, that you are an all-powerful, almighty Creator, and that every breath of life that we take is a blessing from you. Everything that we have to enjoy, what we have in this life, where we live, what we do, everything is a blessing from you. And especially upon this first day of the week as we come to worship you, we're thankful for those blessings that we have together as a group and individually as your children, that we can come and sing praises unto your name, that we can pray to you, that we can read from your divine word, which in and of itself is a great blessing unto us. Let us read and study this morning with open minds, with open hearts. Let us learn your will, your purposes for creating us, your intentions for us, and how we are to live. Please be with all teachers this morning, all students. May we have a remembrance of what we have studied, prepared, and to study your truth and then walk in it, abide in it, live in it as you would have us to do. We're thankful that we can this morning look back and reflect upon that great blessing, that sacrifice of Jesus Christ who came to this earth, lived upon this earth in flesh and blood, and then gave that flesh and blood up in the most cruel way so that we might live with you eternally. Please be with us throughout this day. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Please forgive me for my cough. I have allergies or something that's been going on this week. A lot of that's been going around. I'm sorry about that. Chapter 7, the book of Daniel. We're kind of changing things up, aren't we? From the first six chapters that we studied, it really changes things here. Daniel has been the interpreter of dreams and of visions for other men. Inspired by God, he was able to do this by God's hand. He talked to Nebuchadnezzar. Now we're seeing a little reversal on that, wherein that Daniel is now seeing visions and having dreams, and that's how this chapter starts out. They are very troubling to him. He has angelic messengers telling him and explaining what these things are. These are troubling dreams. These are troubling visions that he has in teaching and in this that he's having to do. And so now as we see these prophetic images, understand this is predictive prophecy. And it is figurative language. Might help. Thank you. And so that we have this predictive prophecy here. Well, that's being given to Daniel. And as he's given these images, as he's given these visions, the explanations is still given on what they are. And it is really predictive prophecy of actual history. And we talked about this when we covered chapter 2. Now, understanding figurative language, and as I mentioned last week, figurative language just doesn't leave the meaning of a passage open to whatever we want to apply to it. And there is a lot of false doctrine taught on the book of Daniel about the language there. and about how what it's talking about is the end of time and that Jesus is going to return to earth and set up his kingdom on earth. There's a lot of false doctrine concerning that and what is taught about that today. That's not what these passages are talked about. Remember keeping the book of Daniel in context. When we interpret figurative language, we've got to look at the context of the chapter, of the book, and of the entire Bible, and interpret it in that way. So that's what we will be looking at. I mean, was it confusing to you as you read about all of these strange animals and beasts here in chapter 7, and you wonder what's going on here? As we think about these things, as I said, keep in context the book and the Bible. One thing that might help us as we talk about this morning is considering these charts that we're going to be using. There's that chart I'll hand it out, but I'll get to that in a moment. In your workbook, the first couple of questions, if you looked on there, contain some things that really, it's a distinction without a difference. They just ask, why should chapter 7 be viewed as the end of the first section of the book of Daniel? And number 2 asks, what's the main objection to seeing chapter 7 as the end of the first section and viewing it as the beginning of the second half of the work instead? And the author in your workbook gives a lot of information on that. I don't know that it really, when you answer it, it really matters one way or another, but did you anybody answer these questions and want to say what they put there and what he's getting at?
I didn't know what he was getting at, but this is the last chapter written in Aramaic, and so it's describing a time of a vision maybe relating to that historical time that Daniel was in. And we had already talked about Aramaic versus Hebrew. He's talking in Hebrew, or writing in Hebrew. It's kind of written towards the Jews, where it's in Aramaic. It's more for historical purposes of that time. And so maybe that was why. He also said the visions, it was a vision like the rest of the visions, so that's why I said it could have been the second half, but I'm with you. I don't know why it matters.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and I think even after you discussed, I think it's more of a scholarly issue that scholars want to debate. I look at it just kind of as a bridge between the first 6 chapters and then the rest of the book, what he's talking about here. And it is the last chapter in Aramaic, and as Kobe brought up, and as we talked about earlier, and what that denotes, that in Aramaic kind of deals with what's going on then, right then, and in the world, and with Daniel and his life, where they're the last few chapters that are in Hebrew. And that's really important, I think, when we realize that part in Hebrew, he's talking to the Hebrews. He's talking to the Jews. It's something that really applies to them, those that would, throughout the centuries, from following this point forward, living in the land of Israel. It applies to them. And I think that points toward the fact, no, he's not writing about something 2,500 years into the future and we're still waiting to happen. It's not. It is having to deal with that them. He, in this chapter, gives another revelation of 4 empires. That's how the dream and the vision is going to be interpreted. And what we need to understand is this is just an expansion, an explanation, a continuing of what began in chapter 2. To take in this book and take chapter 2 and these 4 empires there, and then chapter 4, and come up with a completely, totally different set is illogical. It's against the context, it's against the theme, it's against the thought of what's being written. Well, many false religions do. But no, this applies right along with chapter 2 and what we talked about in chapter 2. And so as we talk about that and see what is going on here, let us keep that in mind. But as you read all this figurative language in Daniel chapter 7, chapter 8, all these symbols, all these numbers that are symbolic for something and represent something. And 7, 8, 9, 11, and 12 can get, I know, really complicated when we don't know what's going on right there. Here's what we want to understand, and here's the big theme, and let's not lose sight of the forest for the trees, but look at the end of chapter 7. If you look in verse 27, where he says, "Then the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him." And so as we've been talking about back in the first 6 chapters, God is with his people. He is with his faithful remnant. In chapters 1, chapter 3, chapter 6, we see he was with every individual faithful child of his and will support them and help them. And then in the other chapters and in these chapters, he is with his remnant among his chosen people. And that's the way it will be for all times, that God rules in the nations of men. And God supports his faithful. And these words are words of hope and encouragement through all the tribulations, the trials, the persecutions. In life, his people in the land of Canaan are going to undergo supreme persecution. And that's the way it's going to be for the faithful of God. But there will be a time when justice will be brought to the wicked and the faithless, and eternal peace will be brought to the faithful child of God. Okay, that's it. Look through all the symbolism and everything, and that is it right there. And so we can start right now if you want to. But we've got 2 more months left in this quarter. so we might as well read it and look at it and see what's going on right here. As we look at chapter 7, and some of us may have not been able to read it all. Kobe, would you mind reading through verse 14?
In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. And he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, "I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and the 4 great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And suddenly another beast, a second like a bear, it was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and they said thus to it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and there was another, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him, 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. I watched them because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, and all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed.
Thank you, Kobe. Very strange vision here that Daniel saw. What year was it when Daniel had this vision?
First year of Belshazzar.
When's that? Within a decade. First of all, within a century. The 6th century BC. So, remember, kind of, you know, the Babylonians ruled basically 70 years from 609 to 539. So this was about when 3 years after Nabonidus became king of Babylon, and his son Belshazzar, as y'all mentioned, was now in his first year of his reign. Belshazzar was the son of Nabonidus. He was a grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. He became co-leader with his father at approximately, when Nabonidus came to power in about 556 or so BC, 556 BC. About 17 years or so before the fall of Babylon, which is, we know for a fact, was 539 BC. So this became known to Daniel about 3 years after that. We read from one is in the 3rd year was about to begin. He, Nabonidus, is talking about here, entrusted the camp to his oldest son, the firstborn, that's Belshazzar, and he ordered his command. He let everything go and trusted the kingship to him. So remember when we talked about in chapter 5, Belshazzar was this co-ruler with his father Nabonidus, and he was there in Babylon at that time. So the events, what I'm getting at, the events of here in chapter 7 takes place about 14 years before the events of chapter 5. Okay? And we'll see chapter 8 is also before chapter 5 and chapter 6 as well. So that would make Daniel at this time, in the events of chapter 7 and chapter 8, he's about somewhere in his 60s. Is how old he is. But back in chapter 5 and chapter 6, he's in his 80s. Okay? So let's just remember that. Let's get that in our mind and what he's going to be talking about here in this vision that he sees. And remember this vision in Daniel's interpretation. You remember these charts I handed out on paper to everyone that you can fill out, and then Justin made me an electronic copy, and I sent that to you. If you want a copy of that, let me know, and I can send it to you if you want it. You don't need it, but I think it puts things clearly in my mind. It helps me see what's going on here and what's being talked about, and as we go along here, as he talks about this vision, and we can put it all in perspective. So we see here in verse 1 that Daniel begins speaking, and we got to decide whether, when this was written, and if this was written like some false teachers say in the 1st century BC or 2nd century, then verse 1 is a lie. But we got to decide whether Daniel's telling the truth or not, and this was then what he saw at this point in time in the 1st year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon's reign. And he says, Daniel is writing in the 3rd person now, he says he wrote down the dream telling the main facts. So everything in this vision we don't have recorded for us. There's probably some other stuff going on we didn't see, of course, and it's not all written down for us, but the main facts are written for us right here. And he says these 4 winds of heaven were stirring against the great sea. And this has always been indicative of the hand of God, the workings of God. When we read in apocalyptic literature, whether in the book of Revelation, or we read in Daniel and Ezekiel or in any other prophets, this is kind of idea that's used to depict the actions of God. This idea of the winds were stirring, and they come out from the great sea. In other words, from the world, from the nations of the inhabited earth, is what he's speaking of. And I kind of like the way Homer Haley puts it in his commentary. He turns it this way. He says, the wind and the sea is the upheaval in society that results in various governments and nations. All that's going on in the world, and we can see that God is behind that, and he is behind this all. And so as we look at this chart here, and that's just going back, that's the image, that's some man's rendition of the image that Nebuchadnezzar saw in chapter 2. Remember the head of gold and chest of arms, the belly and thighs of bronze, the legs of iron, and the feet of iron and clay. Can't really see that. And then we had the stone that was cut without hands. What did Daniel tell Nebuchadnezzar the head of gold was? Remember? Chapter 2? Yeah. Him being, Nebuchadnezzar. And by extension, the Babylonian Empire, the Babylonian kingdom. Now, as we talked in chapter 2, we filled out this chart in chapter 2, the chest of arms and silver. When Daniel said, then he said to Nebuchadnezzar, these are kingdoms that will arise after you. What does the chest and arms of silver represent? I'm sorry. Yeah, the Medo-Persian Empire and the thighs of bronze. Okay, Greece and the legs of iron. Remember we talked about that? What iron symbolized by what nation? Okay. And the symbolicness of the stone that was not cut with hands is what? Represents what? Daniel 2:44. Yeah. That's Daniel 2:44 is a passage, that we should know that it applies when we talk about the kingdom of God. It was foretold. These kings, God of heaven, will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. The kingdom shall not be left to other people. And this is what he is talking about here. Question 3 in your book now says, describe the first terrible beast that Daniel saw in his dream and summarize its meaning. So Kobe read this, and so what did he read? What did you put there? What is the first beast?
A lion with eagle's wings.
Okay, a lion with eagle's wings. What kingdom, as we get into the interpretation now, what do we know about what kingdom is this going to represent?
It being the first one, I thought it was Babylon.
Yeah, the lion with the eagle's wings. Like I said at the introduction, he's talking about 4 kingdoms here, isn't he? He's talking about 4 empires. And they are the same ones he's talking about in chapter 2. He doesn't introduce 4 new ones. And there's many false teaching that says he does. He doesn't. This goes right along with this. This is how Babylon was described in Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 7. The lion has come up from his thicket, and the destroyer of nations is on his way. Jeremiah the prophet told Israel, he's come forth from his place to make your land desolate. Your cities will be laid waste without inhabitant. Ezekiel chapter 17 and verse 3, Ezekiel's prophesying about this time, and he refers to him as a great eagle full of feathers. In verse 12, say now to the rebellious house of Israel. Do you know what these things mean? Tell them indeed the king of Babylon went to Jerusalem to take them over. And so that is what is represented then, as we see right there in that passage. And there's other references as well also. The Babylon is represented with the lion with eagle's wings. But what does the passage say? What does he see in the vision about the wings on this lion? Which is a weird thing to say. See, is this lion, but it has wings like an eagle. What happens to them? They're plucked off. It's flying this moving, ferocious lion, though. His wings are plucked off. And all of a sudden, this four-footed lion beast stands up on 2 feet like a man, and what was given to it? A man's heart. This ferocious, regal, ruling lion then becomes and is given and acts like a man. Can we see some reference here to what happened to Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 4? We remember what happened to Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 4, right? He was brought low. His pride brought him low. As Tyler taught in class this morning, this empire had soared high, but God brought it low. The ferocity, this power of a lion, the swiftness and the tenacity of an eagle, that's what it once had. But it gave way to the tameness and to the frailties of plain humanity. And so that's what he's talking about here, and that's your answer there. And question number 3, what about question number 4? Describe the second monster Daniel saw in his dream and summarize its meaning. What was the second monster that was seen? Pardon me?
Bear.
The bear, okay. So the second monster was this ferocious bear raised up on one side, ribs in its teeth. It says, "Arise, devour much flesh." So the second thing that he saw was this ferocious bear, and what does it, where would it fit on our chart? Who does it represent? Okay, the Medes and the Persians. Chest and the arms of silver. The Medo-Persian Empire. And right here in chapter 7, it's seen as this ferocious bear right here. Let us understand there is false teaching that says the Medes were the second kingdom. Persia was the third kingdom, and Greece was the fourth. And the reason that is that detractors say that's because Daniel wrote in the 1st or 2nd century AD. And so he's writing history. All of this came to pass. And so they want to do that. Any reputable historian will tell you, no, the Medes were never a great, large world empire. But they had to combine with the Persians to become that political power back in that day and time. And so we see the Medes and the Persians there that they ruled. They were ruled by various kings throughout their history. We're not going to go into all of that. There's a lot of speculation too, and it mentions the 3 ribs that the bear had in its mouth. Not going to really go into that because there's a lot of speculation on that too. For our purposes, I don't think we need to. Let us understand in the symbolic language, there's a lot of things that we don't know. That's still not understood. And there's a lot of things that faithful scholarly men differ over exactly what it is, but the big picture they all agree. We're going to get into that in chapter 8 with the 2,300 days. We'll get into it right here in chapter 7 with the 10 kings that he talks about, that as well. But the basis is that they all agree on the main thoughts that I presented earlier. Question 5 asks to describe the third creature Daniel dreamed about and summarize its meaning. What was the third creature? Okay, the leopard, pardon me?
A leopard with four wings and 4 heads.
Okay, the leopard with 4 wings. So that would go in box A, right? That's what we're talking about. The image in chapter 2, the belly of thighs of bronze, representing the Grecian Empire, as Daniel interpreted the dream in chapter 2. And here in chapter 7, in Daniel's vision, this is going to be giving the interpretation to him. It's a 4-headed leopard with 4 wings. What is a characteristic of a leopard? I'm sorry?
Spots, James's spots.
Spots and what else? What? Extremely fast animal. A very speedy animal. And he has not only 2 sets of wings, he has 2 sets of wings. He has 4 wings. 2 sets of 2 wings. He's got 4 wings. 4 wings on a leopard represents what? Extreme speed, extreme quickness. We can see how this applies to Greece, right? When we look at history and we think about Alexander the Great and his conquering the known world at that time. And as we look at this, and this is the kingdom, the conquering of Alexander the Great's empire at the height of his victories in 323 BC. Alexander of Macedon, all the way from Greece, all the way through Egypt. And what's interesting, it would take a long time just to walk that. He did this in 10 years. That's why it's called Alexander the Great. In most of the battles, his armies were outnumbered, yet he was victorious through all of that. And within 2 years, he had conquered Asia Minor, it says. And then just another 2 years, all the way through the land of Israel and into Egypt. And then just a few more years, 10 years in all the way through to India, through Persia. And that is why he is represented by the leopard with the 4 wings there. A very young man when he started his conquest and his empire. But that is what we're talking about. Remember, we're talking about this world history right there. And question number 6 then asks us to describe the 4th beast the prophet saw in his dream and summarize its meaning. What was the 4th beast? What was it? That Colby just read, that we just read. He's already talked about a lion, strange looking lion, but a lion, a bear, and a leopard. What animal does he use to describe this? That's a trick question.
One different from all the others.
Yeah, it's different from all the others. It's not an animal. There's not an animal that Daniel can use. All these others are written and described as something, well, like this, in order to give us a description that humans know. Couldn't do that with this one. This is a 4th and terrifying beast here, and I didn't know what else to put up there, so that's what I put. There wasn't anything to compare it to. There's a lack of any kind of animal that he compared it to. And this is the one that Daniel wants to know the most about. It is ferocity and all there. And not only, when you talk about this 4th beast, it talks about all of these beasts that rise up and they devour the other. You look in verse 7. Not only, as he saw in the night visions, the 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. Going back to chapter 2 in the reference there. It devoured just like the others. But not only did it devour, but it broke in pieces, and then it trampled the residue with its feet. The others devoured their kingdoms. This one devoured his victims, and what was left over, it stomped on. Okay, this is extremely violent and vicious empire that he sees that's coming up, and that's what we talked about. We looked at some quotes when we talked about the Roman Empire there in chapter 2 and what they did and how they conquered most of the world. And in their heyday, even in the first, all the way to the first century, they conquered all of these areas. They conquered the world at that time. They were more ferocious than all the beasts that came before it in their conquering of the world. And remember, throughout the book of Daniel, we made mention of the fact when it talks about the world and world empires, and detractors want to say, no, I mean, there were other nations of people around. Remember, the emphasis of the book of Daniel is on this land right here. And so that's why it gives the empires that concern that land and God's people and his nation there. But that is then the fourth beast as we look at those maps and as we look at the chart there. That's kind of how we fill it out. And that helps us understand what's going on in chapter 7 and chapter 8 as well when we get to it. And when we get to when you do, if you're doing this in chapter 8, there's only 2 boxes filled in chapter 8. Okay, so don't try to look to fill out the whole thing. There's only 2. The other 3 are blank. But as we look at this and see what is given right here, remember the only one now that Daniel has specifically stated and is written down for us is box number 1, Babylon. In the head of gold, as he told Nebuchadnezzar specifically. But we are going to be able to fill in the blanks with the others, and we're going to provide more evidence for that when we do get to chapter 8. But we're in chapter 7 right now. And so Daniel is watching this figure right here. He's very much interested in this beast. And he says in verse 8, verse 8, I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. So this is what he is seeing right here. He is concerned about this beast and the blasphemies that are going on and the things that he is speaking. And then who comes upon him, and what does he see there in verse 9? Okay, the Ancient of Days. And some other translations may say some other things. This is not precisely a name, it's more of a description. Because he's seeing images here, realize. He sees these 4 images that we've already talked about. Now he's seeing another image that is to represent something, that it is figurative, that it is representative of something. And as our study of the Ancient of Days, one who is Ancient of Days, what does this figure represent? What is this telling us? What is it to be? It represents someone, it's a figurative that portrays and sends a message. So it's someone, he says, the Ancient of Days is something that would appear to be an older individual, an older person. And it says he was seated. And his garment was white as snow. When we talk about that, and his hair is like pure wool, this idea of white as snow and pure wool, what does that bring to our mind?